for the Kenai. I'm Aaron. We're here with Eric and Cobran back at Serenity House today with another guest. Heidi's with us today. How's it going, Heidi?
It's going pretty good. I'm grateful you guys asked me to share. So
Yeah, excited to have you. I know we've tried a few scheduling a few times, and now we're here rocking. So
life happens when you get clean.
yeah.
Wow.
And you're pretty busy, right?
I am. I'm a very busy human being. Very productive. I've got a wife. I've got a kid. Job in college.
And college, yeah.
Work for a nonprofit. Working on some certifications on top of that. So yeah, my plate's pretty darn full.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heidi and I take some classes together, and one of our classes we've been in the same group, so we've been working on group projects together lately. So we've been getting to know each other there, and we've also gotten to present together. You know, we gave some presentations on some like what schools of psychology, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been fun. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Let the listeners get a little idea of kind of who you are.
Okay, so I am born and raised in Alaska, or on the Oregon coast primarily.
Yeah, you spent some years in the Portland area, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
primarily though on Oregon coast,
Okay.
Portland area. That's where I graduated high school and
Okay.
where I had a lot of drug use.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm a mom to a spunky little 7-year-old. We're in the process of adopting her.
Oh wow.
I'm married to someone else who's also in long-term recovery.
Okay.
I am the oldest of 3. My dad passed away about a year ago, so that was pretty rough.
Yeah.
I got clean when I was 20 years old.
Really?
Yeah,
20.
I was 20.
And you've
I
stayed?
relapsed after
Okay.
9 months, so
Okay.
my clean date is 7/26 of 08.
Oh wait.
08.
So that's like what, 11 years now?
Almost.
Almost 11 years.
I'm almost 11.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It's a very long time.
So you started this 11-year clean span when you were around 21?
21.
Jeez, good job.
Yeah, well, I come from a family of...
Doesn't seem you hear that too much.
No,
I mean,
no.
maybe you
Pretty
do, but
uncommon.
we haven't.
Well, when I got into the 12-step community, there were not people that were as young as I was getting clean. They were in their late 20s or
Sure.
early 30s, but it was pretty hard to identify. And so now that, I see it a lot more. We have people that come in that are 17, 18, 19, 20, and in this area anyways. I know bigger metropolitan areas, it's really common, but it kind of gives me the ability to share, like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. So
You can probably identify in some of those ways
yeah.
and at least help them through I would imagine you could relate to them in ways that others can, that would be beneficial to them in some ways.
Most definitely, especially
Huh.
when I like to talk about, that addict part of myself being that little voice that says things like, well, you've never drank at a bar, so, maybe you can go drink in a bar, and just that fantasy, getting caught up in all those things that I never went through as like normal society's rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge thing that younger people get caught up in as well, justifying their use because they didn't drink in a bar, or this didn't happen, or that didn't happen. And so being able to share, like, well, yeah, maybe that didn't happen, but there were some other things that did happen.
Right. It's interesting you bring up the rite of passage idea, because for the most part, I would say, in most of our recordings, a lot of them, we have, maybe looking back, maybe a little too much focus on some real individual factors, And yeah, we would, acknowledge that the individuals have the disease of addiction, right? However, we also see a big cultural aspect. The last recording we did, there was, this work hard, play hard mentality that was in the culture. And if you weren't playing hard, that you were, other, you were lesser, you were different, etc. And at this point, it's not just a work hard, play hard. You see this kind of throughout, the rite of passage of 21 and going to the bar, so it's just infiltrating. And as that was, it seems as if maybe not like a heavy influence for you to continue in substance abuse, as it wasn't. You got clean, stayed clean. But it still was, an influence. And seems to be, at times maybe something you think of.
Yeah, I mean, there's a piece of grief to it. I wasn't aware of it until just a couple years ago. I actually acknowledged it, that, I grieved over the fact that I didn't partake in some of those things. I mean, for instance, yesterday in class, just listening to a couple people talk about going and having beers at the brewery. I never went and sampled beer at the brewery before, and I was like, that would be really fun. And then, of course, for me, I have to think it all the way through.
Right.
And like, that would not end well for me or for the people that I was with.
Maybe this is a recovery thing, but we've heard from people say that they've played that tape forward. Is that a common saying or something in recovery? You got to play it forward or something?
There's that disconnect between action and
Cause
consequence.
And effect, yeah.
Action and consequence.
Yeah.
Whether it's a positive consequence or a negative consequence, I'm trying really hard not to put the whole counselor spin on it. But honestly, for me, that's kind of where I had to go in order to keep my recovery. I had to look at the science behind it. I had to look at the reasons why I have this disease. And, so making that shift from that primal limbic brain to that, thought process, conscious decision making has literally been the catalyst that I've gone through, and I've seen so many other people gone through in order to stay clean and to have a good life.
Is it just kind of like knowing your behavior in the future? You're like, theoretically, I could, but I know me, and is that going to happen, sort of thing? Or is it just knowing better beforehand, so you're never in the situation?
I don't know how much of it is knowing better beforehand. For me, anyways, I came from a family where extreme drug use and alcohol use. My dad was a fisherman, so he was gone 9 months out of the year most of the time. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom who, for the first few years of my life, pretty much gave me a coloring book and some crayons. And that was my life. So I don't know what normal is. And so I really have to stop and think a lot before I make decisions.
Sure. Yeah. Like, you have to question your perspective.
To question everything.
Yeah.
It's very exhausting.
That is hard.
Yeah, it's very exhausting. And there's that spiritual aspect where I have to rely on something bigger than myself, which takes away some of that struggle. I definitely don't struggle with this new way of living my life, but there are parts and pieces, I think like everyone's life, that are difficult. So my addiction doesn't define who I am as a person. It is an aspect of who I am, and it's part of who I am, but it's not me.
It's interesting you say that. I think I've thought about that in the past a little bit, and just thought that whether good or bad, I didn't evaluate its final status or whatever, but it does seem that addiction, for those who are going to identify as, suffering from addiction, does, at times at least, or for periods of their lives, really define who they are.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not trying to state necessarily what the cause is, whatever, but I don't think like hi, I'm Steve and I'm an addict. I don't think that's that far away from saying, hi, I'm the addict Steve. It starts to all get maybe a little bit mixed up. So why is it important that it doesn't identify you? Is it just that you're bigger than that you yourself? So you are like more multidimensional than like a single
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I know in early recovery for me, I had to
Take that
just hone in on that. I
Mhm.
just had to hone in on the fact that I was an addict. I had to,
Mhm.
it had to be drilled into my brain. I had to drill it in my brain. And so my life was literally going to meetings, being around people that were sound of mind, so sober, so not using alcohol, not using marijuana, not using any sort of mood or mind altering substance except for caffeine
Sure.
and nicotine, because those are unfortunately a huge part of the subculture today of people who are trying to live a clean and sober life. And
Sure.
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I definitely partake in those, so I have no say as far as some of those things are concerned.
Mhm.
But you know, it's for a while there, my identity was that I was an addict, and that was the only piece that I really could identify with. I didn't even know what I liked. I didn't know who I was, and so that was the starting point to figure out who I am and those different parts and pieces that make me who I am. But I had to come to a point eventually where I realized that that's just a piece of who I am. It's not who I am.
Mhm.
So.
I read some. It's really interesting that you do say that, because I did read some research in a class one time, a community psychology class, and really it was to show that when you're going into different communities and different cultures, that your framework just isn't, your perspective just isn't going to work necessarily. And one of the things that I was reading was they were studying in an Alaska Native community. I'm not sure exactly which one, and obviously that would matter if you were going to really investigate the ins and outs of it. But for the sake of the story, they're researching some, I think, like community values, community practices, both in the community as well as how that individuals are influencing their community, etc. And one of the questions they asked an Alaska Native person was essentially, "So what is your recovery like today?" And they say, and it just didn't even register because it just was not a part of them, because they had essentially, I would say, this person kind of had and this culture kind of had a perspective like you're kind of having now. And it was kind of like, I did that, I used to do these things. I used to drink a lot and it was problematic, and then I recovered, and now I'm not hi, I'm an addict. I'm this person. I'm Alaska Native. This is my family members. These are my communities. This is how I live my life. They just don't. It's not a perpetual label of like, hi, I'm this person and I'm an addict and I'm consistently I'm doing all these recovery things because I am an addict. It was like, it just became it wasn't a sole identifier.
Right.
It's interesting.
Well, and you know, the fact that I do have a position as a substance abuse counselor, I spend all day drilling that into people's head that, this doesn't define you, but this is where you're at right now.
Mhm.
You have to look at this if you want.
If you want to
A
have more
life.
dimensions than this.
Yeah.
Because frankly, for the last number of years, perhaps, this has been, for the most part, your life. Engaging in active addiction has consumed your life.
Yeah.
And as it one day does not, you will have more aspects of you. But at this point, if you want those aspects to develop, really, you have to focus on this one that has been consuming your life. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's like being aware of reality and what the truth is. And I mean, I've heard a few people say that their addiction is a form of escape from reality. So staring at that sounds like the first step to kind of realizing what's going on.
Yeah, it's definitely, I most certainly had to be drilled in my head that I'm not more powerful than this disease, and that it's super sneaky, and if I'm not careful, it will bite me. And
What do they say in the recovery community, that it's cunning or
cunning,
something?
baffling, and powerful.
Cunning, baffling, and
And
powerful.
it will swallow you whole if you let it.
Yeah.
So how do you stop from feeling weak because you struggle?
I have something that's way bigger than me that takes care of me. And I am not more powerful than this disease, and so I guess it's in that surrender in that weakness that I find that grace and that faith and that strength to move forward. And, you know, I don't say these things, I don't mean these things to sound in a Christian context. However, the 12 steps were designed around a Christian concept, so a lot of the slogans do come from a lot of those concepts. You know, individually, I did struggle with that in early recovery. That was a huge struggle, mainly because, you know, kind of backing up to my childhood a little bit. My mother is also an adult child of an alcoholic. I'm an adult. I mean, it's just this huge generational thing in my family. And
You're breaking it.
my mom and my dad wanted me and my brother to both have a really good education, so they put us in Catholic school as children, and we were not Catholic. And so there's a lot of discrimination, a lot of things that were done that were quite horrible to a 6-year-old. So not only did I have an unsafe environment at home, I had an unsafe environment at school.
During some
And-
very formative, and as we're definitely learning more and more, sensitive years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
extremely. I didn't have anywhere safe.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would hear the nuns say, you know, that they were sisters of God. And I decided that if they were sisters of God, then I wanted nothing to do with that God. So at about 6, I pretty much turned my back on the whole idea of God. And so it was really, that was something I really struggled with in early recovery, was I was finding forgiveness for the people, not necessarily the higher power, but for the people. And so when I say God today, I refer to that as good orderly direction. And, you know, I guess I kind of have a metaphysical energy, I call it woo-woo idea of a higher power today.
Sure.
But it's definitely bigger than I am, and it's definitely bigger than my disease. And so that's really where I get a lot of that faith and that grace from, in order to stay clean and to, you know, help other people and not get jaded. So it's
And that
easier.
seems the feeling small. I guess like that humbling. You know what I mean? Whether because in a lot of our recovery stories, you know, it's you know, in recovery it seems important to continue staying humble, but there's always that experience, that original experience that humbles you, because it is like, you know, that stepping back and I'm not more than this, and you hear in this like, well, I thought I could control it, or like I didn't think, like I wasn't gonna let it swallow me or consume my life, you know, and then without you really even being cognizant of it, it does, and it's
Right.
and now like having that in the back of your mind that you have to remain humble and that you aren't more powerful than your disease, you know, is really big. I think that's hard.
It is really hard. It's a really hard concept. It was for me to wrap my head around. I had some really good examples as a child. When I was about 6 or 7, right around that time period, my mom was introduced to a 12-step program. And she stayed. As a result of that, as a small child, I got dragged to meetings with her, you know, my mom didn't have access to childcare, things like that. So my brother and I were actually 18 months apart in age, and so we would get dragged with her to meetings. And I always say this, and if you've been to a meeting, great, and if you haven't been to a meeting, then this is still kind of a visual. I was the kid in the back of the meeting with a coloring book and a crayon, and it was very apparent to me that my mom needed those meetings like it was medicine. Like if she didn't have them, my life was going to be horrible. And so
Wow.
from a young age, I started listening. I listened a lot. And there is a really vivid memory I have. I don't know if it was Christmas or Thanksgiving. It was one of those holidays. And we had just gotten in the car from my mom being at a meeting. And I looked at my mom and I was like, Mom, I don't ever want to be an alcoholic. She was like, why? And I was like, because I don't want to have to go to those meetings. She was like, why? I'm like, because you go to a lot of those meetings, you know. And so that was kind of where that resistance idea was planted, and I don't know where it came from. You know, and that was one of the big baffling pieces for me.
I mean, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like staying engaged is sometimes a demanding task.
Right? I mean, even at 6, I realized that
Yeah,
was the main
yeah, that's
problem.
interesting. Actually, at 6 years old.
This sucks.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
lot.
So, you know, I grew up.
It's a lot to contemplate at 6,
Yeah.
honestly. You know what I mean? Like, even just like the sheer fact that you go there and at 6 years old, like you said, a coloring book and a crayon at this is a place where you're probably bored.
Super bored.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Just bored, but you gotta be there because of this, and this. Like, that's just a lot going on.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, like before, I was that kid that had a coloring book and crayon, even at the kitchen table in our house. I mean, I was always listening. I was a very observant child to the point where people thought that I might have a learning disability because I was so incredibly shy that I wouldn't even talk. I mean, deathly afraid of people. Deathly afraid of people. For a number of years, I was even afraid of my own father, and that was partly due because he was never home. So, yeah, men scared the crap out of me. I was surrounded by women a lot. My grandmother, my mom, my aunt. Of course, they were all drinking. So, yeah, that's where I got a lot of my models from, was from those women in my family. And, yeah, it was definitely something different when my mom started to get sober and go to 12-step meetings. Fast forwarding a little bit, my mom had, you know, gained some time in recovery, and, you know, the other aspect of that was I got to see what her life was like in recovery and how that changed our household. And some of the things that changed were that she would have women come over and she would work 12 steps with them, and it was really cool to see that bond. And so I always kind of idolized that bond of seeing people have that kind of connection, seeing people come from the depths of hell and the light coming on, and seeing something different. And I watched a lot of that growing up too. So it wasn't all bad. I got to see the positive,
Right.
because of recovery.
Yeah.
Before it had even, you know, it was manifesting in my life before I had even started to have a problem with it, at least that I noticed. So, kind of what had happened, my parents got a divorce when I was about 9. My little brother, he struggles with addiction also, and
He's 18 months younger or 18 months older?
18 months younger, and he's still in his addiction off
Sure.
and on. But he'd started to get into some trouble, so him and I, you know, we were buds. I always tell him, I'm like, you're my very first best friend.
Sure.
You know, and
Yeah.
And when he got into some trouble, I kind of broke off from that because I spent a lot of time trying to get other people's attention and love through getting good grades, being the perfect child, a lot of perfectionism, a lot of codependency, a lot of things I've had to work on in recovery, things that I still do today, issues that I have when I feel that someone is frustrated with me or irritated with me. I still most of the time shut down.
Really?
Which is really difficult at work too.
Mhm.
That's something that I struggle with, but it's part of learning. So, long story short, we moved to the Oregon coast, Astoria, Oregon, and 7th grade hit, and my eating got a little out of control. I'd say that was where my addiction started, and it started with food.
Sure.
Food was my big comfort.
Yeah.
I was, like I said before, super shy, so I didn't have hardly any friends. It was really hard for me to make friends. So so food was my comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And then I met a friend of mine who was like, she was like the bad girl. She'd lost her virginity in the 7th grade. She was like the taboo girl.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there was like a little posse of them, and I was like, I can hang with this. This is cool. Like, they're like the misfits. They're the outcasts. And they accepted me, and they stood up for me, and they helped me, you know, and those were the people I was with. And it's funny because they would always call me the nun, because they would like do something bad, and I'd be like, oh, how could you do that? That's so horrible. Like, go smoke a cigarette behind the school or something. Like, I never broke rules. I thought that was like the worst thing in the world you could possibly do, was break rules. And so, I mean, my curiosity with using, it started at that point. Yeah, I hadn't picked up a drink or a drug. And my freshman year in high school, I was 15, and I always say that was the day, because I skipped class, which had never happened. I blame this, of course, all on a guy that was a junior, and I just thought he was so cute. And he was one of my best friend's older brother, so there was that too.
Dang.
Right? I know. Go big or go home. And, you know, I was like the fat, pudgy, shy girl who hung out with, like, the really hot, slutty girls. I mean, I don't know how else to put it except for like that. And
Trying to picture that.
I skipped school, I skipped class, and there was this place that was called The Hill. And it was literally a fence, and then the school, and then on the other side of the fence was private property. And so the cool kids would go up there and smoke cigarettes and smoke pot and whatever.
Fraternize.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to the Hill, and that was the first time I smoked pot. And I remember just feeling this rush of excitement. Like, oh my gosh, my life is about to change. Finally, I have arrived. Things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, I took all of my babysitting money, and, you know, it was interesting how I kind of set myself up for all this. I already knew all the connections. I already knew all the people that I could get all my resources from.
Yeah.
It was like my addict had masterminded before I had.
Yeah, before, yeah.
So insidious, and that's that insidious part. That's where that really started to play. And yeah, the next day I took all my money, got somebody to buy me a kegger, and from that moment on, I was.
You just went and bought a keg?
Yeah.
Dang, you went all out. You started pretty fast.
I started, and there was no.
Yeah.
There was no like progression.
No, this was what we
No
call
trial
in
run?
the abnormal psych test acute onset.
Shush. Shush.
We take abnormal psychology together. Yeah,
It was 0 to 100.
real quick.
It's like, well, if you can't be perfect and you broke one rule, what's the point anymore?
Yeah.
You can't identify with perfection if you're not perfect. So
It's like, sweet. It
Forget
is
it.
on like Donkey Kong. You know, I drank. I didn't black out. I didn't brown out. Browning out is like where it's hazy, but you still remember.
You remember some parts, not the whole thing. Yeah.
So those things didn't happen. But what did happen was the continual use of marijuana and alcohol. And I started smoking cigarettes at that point because I wanted to be cool. And, you know.
So a lot of pressures.
Oh, yeah.
I bet they celebrated when you smoked the nun
Oh,
smoking
yeah.
on the
Oh,
hill.
man,
They must have
yeah.
sang your praises and hoisted you up.
Right, exactly. And that was where a lot of that excitement came from.
Yeah.
So it's
I'm
like,
accepted.
yeah.
They love me.
You know, and they already, and looking back on it, they already did love and accept me for who I am. There's something about addiction where I've never found that amount of acceptance than I did from those people. And some of it was a false facade, for sure. But I still have a lot of those friends today.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, 2 of those people are still my best friends. I still see them. And they're not addicts.
Right.
They're
Right.
not
Right.
addicts, which
Yeah.
totally baffles my mind. I'm like one of like 4 or 5 of those people that I still keep in contact today with good old Facebook, who has an addiction problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's so like I'm in awe of it sometimes.
It is kind of mind-boggling because I like similar experiences. You know, not all the way through, but like with friends like that. You know what I mean? Like for me, it felt so much more different. You know what I mean? They go to college and they do like the drinking thing and hang out. And then all of a sudden, they're like wear suits and got jobs and like they're normal humans. You know what I mean? Or like, but it didn't seem so normal, like when we were doing that stuff in high school. You know what I mean? Or doing that stuff whenever. Like it didn't ever see, like, I just thought they were like me, you know, and it turns out, like, they're normal, bro. Like, you kind of, like, they're just normal people.
Yeah.
Wow, it's interesting.
Normal people. I mean, normal's like a setting on the dryer, but in this context, yes, they do not suffer from
I like
this
that.
disease.
That's cool. Normal's a setting on the dryer.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, that was like the jumping off point into my addiction, and a lot of horrible things happened. And you know, the first time I browned out / blacked out, and I don't know how much of this is trauma and me and my brain. There's a term for it, and we just took a test on it. You'd think I remember. It's like
You should see the steam coming out of Eric's ears
I know,
right
he's
now,
waiting.
trying to think of that.
He's
Oh, I know what it
patiently
is.
waiting.
You're talking about diathesis?
No, I'm talking about amnesia, but the type where your brain purposely
Oh,
hides-
dissociative?
dissociative amnesia. Yeah. So the first time I brown out and had a blackout, I was raped,
Oh, wow.
and I was 16
Wow.
years old at the time, and I stopped talking after that. I didn't talk for like 3 months. And it was pretty horrible. Like, there were rumors going around the school that I was like making it up and
Oh
that
my
it didn't
gosh.
happen, and all these horrible things. And
Wow.
I shut down completely.
Wow.
And depression kicked in really bad. And I always had issues with depression from a young age. I mean, God, just thinking about when I was 6. I mean, even back then I was depressed and lonely. 6-year-olds, that's like so sad.
Yeah.
Well, it's like to celebrate finally feeling in with the crowd and then to be betrayed like that. Like,
Right.
have something horrible happen to you and then a bunch of people just blame you. Like, blaming the
Right.
victim kind of
Well,
thing. Like,
and the other part of that
the
too is that
rumors and
guy
stuff.
was pretty freaking sick. He was pretty sick.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that happened. And I was 16, and my mom decided that she was going to get remarried, and we moved to Scappoose, Oregon, which is 20 minutes outside of Portland. So I went from a coastal community, I went from an environment where I was always at the beach, around the beach. That was, I mean, the beach is where I talk to my higher power. That's nature. And I get a lot of that calming aspect from the beach. So for me, moving inland, it was just that piece alone was horrible.
And how long had you lived in Astoria?
I lived in Astoria for about 4 years.
Astoria. Okay.
And right before that, I had lived in Ilwaco, Washington. And then
So you've
before
moved a
that-
little bit.
I moved a little bit.
And is that's hard,
Every
a
couple
little
of
bit
years.
hard, right?
It wasn't because I was always at the beach. I was
Sure.
always surrounded by the beach. I mean, one of the houses I lived in, literally you crossed the street and you were on the bay. It was an
Yeah.
amazing childhood.
Yeah. Okay.
I always joke about how my brother and I survived, like, playing unsupervised by the ocean all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a great respect for the ocean.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hence all my anchors. I wear lots of
Yeah,
anchors and
yeah.
lots of hooks and lots of things. And that's actually a big part of my identity that I get from where I've grown up and the heritage that I have in my
Sure.
family. So.
Yeah.
Inland to a tiny little town called Scappoose, Oregon, and that just happened to be where my mom had grown up and gone to high school, and my dad had grown up and gone
And you
to high
said pretty
school.
small town, yeah?
Small.
Like how small?
Kenai small.
Okay.
So
And you had been living in Astoria? Yeah.
Astoria, Oregon,
Yeah.
and that was about the same population. I've always lived in small towns.
Okay.
So moving, and not having that beach aspect or that place to go to kind of recenter and get back with my God was definitely hard for me. I'd moved with my mom and my stepfather. At that time, I have a sister that's 9 years younger than me, and so I spent a lot of time raising her also. And my life did change hugely. I went to a school where I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. So just kind of
You were exactly how old again?
16.
That's hard.
That's rough.
That's really hard.
I went to 4 different high schools.
I moved a little bit growing up, and Aaron and I were actually just talking about, I hated it.
Right.
Like, during some, like, hard times, like, those are, sometimes are hard to move, some ages are.
Yeah.
I think I moved when I was, like, once when I was going into 7th grade, so, like, what, 12 or 13, I don't know, 10, 12? I don't know what grade that is, what age that is exactly, but, like, at 12 or something, and then moved again when I was, like, a freshman in high school, so about, like, 13, like,
15.
no, dude, my bad. But yeah, like 12 and then again at 15. Like those were both like, those are tough ages. I don't know.
Yeah,
Obviously,
those
I'm
are
a
really
little
hard
biased,
ages
but
to move around. Especially when you're just really trying to find yourself.
Your peer
as
group.
not even your peer group, but just yourself, like who you are.
getting
You're just-
acclimated to your situation.
Yes, very much so. I mean, just kind of getting through adolescence in
Yeah,
general,
yeah.
and then having all like this change is a very difficult
Yeah.
situation. I would think at least.
It was really, really difficult. I just threw myself into academics. I took a bunch of AP courses. And that was the other thing. I really dumbed myself down a lot in high school because I was afraid that if I hung out with the people that I was hanging out with and I was super smart and I threw myself into that stuff that I would be rejected, and I just couldn't really identify with a lot of people that I hung out with on that level. So I just kind of hid that part of who I was for a really long time. That with also the fact that when I was younger, all the nuns and stuff telling me that I must be like retarded because I wouldn't talk, I kind of believed some of that. I made myself kind of believe that I really wasn't capable of comprehending things or doing certain things. So that was one of the big hurdles that I had to walk through when I got into recovery, was going back to school and doing better. And that's actually been a huge thing that I've had to overcome time and time again throughout my life so far. And I'm sure, I don't know about anyone else, but I know that there's a lot of people out there who struggle with that. Am I smart enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I friendly enough? And so for a while there, I wasn't doing any drugs or drinking because I didn't really have access to them. I pretty much just stayed in my room, and that was when the internet had kind of picked up a little bit, and there was like the whole chatting, like the online chatting
Oh,
that got
AOL.
really big. Yeah,
And, like,
AOL.
Yeah, Mister, that was tight.
So I literally became a hermit. I
My
went
bad.
to school. And I stayed in my room and I was on the computer all
What
the
was
time.
your username?
I
Do you
don't-
remember?
No.
I remember my cousin, she had her username as Baller Babe. Yeah, Baller Babe. And I remember that. Yeah. Those usernames are funny, man. You look back and like,
Messenger,
oh, those,
yeah.
oh man, I'm having some like hardcore nostalgia with that Messenger, man. I
Yeah.
feel like I asked out several girls over Messenger.
Oh Lord.
I think I might have got accepted once. See your cousin? No. Oh my gosh, Coburn.
Come on, he said
Dude,
it.
that's a weird. That'd be a
Come
weird.
on,
that'd be a
man.
weird
All
situation.
right.
Anyway,
Enough with
we're
the
getting off
cousin.
That'd be a weird
Yeah.
situation. But no, seriously, So you're chatting it up.
Yeah, so I was chatting it up. My dad lived in the town over, which was like 15 minutes away. It's kind of like the distance from Kenai to Soldotna. It's like the same. It's really weird how the setup is here is quite similar to that part of my life. And then also only being 20 minutes outside of Portland. So my dad had started dating a woman, and she had a son that was my age and then a daughter that was a year younger than me. And you know, the first time I went over there, they were smoking weed, and it was just like
The son and daughter.
yeah, I was like, yes, finally,
Yeah.
I can get stoned. I can avoid this reality that I'm living in. These people are my people, you know, and I literally just became attached to her at the hip. Like, we were inseparable. We did everything together. And that is kind of how I found my way back into what I had been missing, you know, because one of the big things for me is if I wasn't using some sort of substance in my body, I quite literally would be in such a bad depression that I didn't want to live. You know, I'd started self-mutilating. I'd started cutting myself off and on from the time I was 15 till, I don't know, 17. There was a chunk of time there where, you know, now learning that, you know, those same self-mutilating behaviors actually, you use the same neural pathways as when you use drugs. So it makes sense to me now looking back on it, why I did some of those things. And it wasn't to hurt myself as far as like to commit suicide, but because I just didn't want to feel the emotional pain that I felt. I was still super shy, still really chubby. You know, I'd never really had, besides the incident where I'd blacked out, I'd never really had any sort of like relationships, like, you know, boyfriends, nothing like that. And so I got to hang out with her, and she did hang out with guys, and she hung out with everybody, and it was like, cool, maybe I can get in with these people. So eventually things got pretty rough between my mother and I. A lot of the teenager, you know, I hate you, you're ruining my life, blah blah blah. So I moved in with my dad, and my dad was pretty awesome. He was going to night school, and he had quit fishing at that point. He was going to night school to be a plumber, and his basic rule was just pass all your classes and go to class, and other than that, you know, don't do any hard drugs, but I don't care if you smoke pot, and I don't care if you drink on the weekends. I was like, okay, cool. So it kind of became a little like housewife for my dad, which was weird. I would cook and clean and, you know, do that stuff, and just kind of, I was stoned every day, you know. I started stealing money from my dad. I would actually sneak off with his ATM bank card. And by this time, I'd gotten my driver's license, and I would take it up to the ATM because I learned his PIN, and I would just pull $20 off here, $40 off there. And my parents were always really horrible with money anyway, so they never really paid attention to that sort of thing. And so that was kind of one way that I supplied my habit. The other way was I'd gotten a part-time job as a sandwich artist at Subway.
Nice.
Yes. So I would do that on certain days. I'd met another girl that lived right up the street from me. She's 2 years younger than me, and I'd actually met her through my little brother. And she is my very best friend in the entire world. In fact, we just talked last night.
Oh wow.
She's my rock. She's a little bit wilder than I was, for sure. Loudmouth, very vocal. And then there's me, who's like super shy. So complete opposites in that regard. My use continued. Somehow, I don't know how, I had started to make frequent trips down to Astoria to the friends that I had down there. And so I would, you know, go down there once a month and just get obliterated, and started just like sleeping around down there with the same person. And things just got really crazy really quickly.
Pretty. It sounds like you went from like not really doing
had
a lot of
complete
drugs,
freedom.
and then to pretty well just being stoned every day.
Yeah, I had.
I mean, once the
yeah, I
yeah.
had that free. I was given permission to finally not be so perfect. Is how I felt. I didn't have all eyes watching me, and so it was like I could breathe, and I had that pressure release to kind of not have to feel all that anxiety and depression and dread that I had. So I graduated high school. Right before I graduated high school, I got into ecstasy, and I dabbled a little bit with cocaine, but it wasn't really. It was just like whenever it was available. I tried shrooms a couple times. I tried opiates a couple times. But it wasn't anything that I really got into. It was pretty much drinking and smoking weed. And so I graduated high school. And that summer, I decided that I was going to go to school and become a certified nursing assistant because they made decent money. And, you know, long story short, I had a grandfather who was paralyzed most of my childhood. And so I had spent a lot of time in nursing homes and around the elderly. And I love old people. They're so cool. They got good stories. And so I decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a nurse. So graduated high school, barely. And I remember the first time I tried to not do drugs. I thought I was going to get UA'd, so I was like, oh gosh, I got to make it a whole month without smoking pot. How am I going to do this? And I just remember it being like the worst month of my life. I went to school. I got my CNA license. I started working at the nursing home that I'd gotten my license at. And I started smoking pot again. Shortly after that, I moved in with a friend of mine. And the conditions were not very great. It was like 9 of us in this tiny little 2-bedroom apartment. They had like an infestation of fleas, and my legs were covered in flea bites. And it was just so gross, and people were doing drugs left and right, and I was working as a CNA, and then I was also doing in-home care, and
But you were on a regular basis doing some hard drugs to excess.
Yeah, I was.
At this point, are you getting concerned? You're like, my
No.
life is...
No, because I still had a job.
Sure, yeah. And you had a place to stay, even
And
though
I
it
had
was
a
a little
place
bit
to stay.
less than ideal.
And I had a place to stay, and I thought, I know everybody I work with, and I party with some of these people. I could just start selling at work. So I was taking care of people under the influence. Started doing things. I started blacking out. At one point, I slept with my best friend's boyfriend, and I did that off and on.
Classic.
I did things that I wasn't proud of.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems like some of your values that you had once clung to were starting to slip away.
Yeah.
And probably quickly.
Yeah, really quickly. I bought a Ford Mustang off the lot, mainly because one of the guys told me that I couldn't do it. And I was like, oh yeah? Like, that's just how I am. You told me I can't do something. Watch me. Like, yeah, you don't ever tell me I can't do something. Like, it's not good when you tell me I can't do something. So, eventually I moved out of that place that I was living. I met this guy. We started dating, and I got my own apartment. We were together for like 6 months. He started pushing me around, and there was some domestic violence in there. And then I was like, all right, I'm just going to move back in with my friends. And at this point, we'd gotten our own house, and, you know, it was just pure chaos. It was just crazy chaos. And we had a party one night. This is kind of where it came to a head. We had a party one night, and I woke up the next morning. And people, I'm sure you've heard of the term coyote ugly, where you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what did I do last night? Who are you? Get out of my room. I don't even know you. And I just came to, and there's beer bottles all over the place. I mean, it was just trashed. I looked like trash. The person I was sleeping with looked like trash. It just was bad. And
Sorry to that person if you ever hear this.
and
We're sure you're
Yeah.
at least a 7 out of 10 these days.
Yeah. No. Facebook.
Well, rip.
I
Rip.
I ran to the bathroom. It was my moment of clarity. I ran to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I was like, who are you? Like, who are you? Like, you are disgusting. Like, I don't even know who you are. And I'd had a dream that night. I'm not going to get into the dream, but basically I'd seen myself from the outside, like, dead. Like, I'd overdosed and died. And I woke up out of that in a panic. And so that was kind of like that moment of clarity of, like, hey, like, literally, I do believe that was my higher power, like, shaking me. Like, how do you not see what's going on around you? And I called my aunt who lived in Sterling. And at the time, my aunt had, like, 11 or 12 years sober. And she actually got sober on my couch when I was about 10 growing up. So it was kind of, it's really cool to see how this has all full circled, because she got my mom sober.
Yeah.
Then she went back out, and then my mom got her sober. And so here I am at 20 years old calling her, and my exact words to her was, my life is spinning out of control. I need help. And she said, how much money do you have? And I said, I have enough for a plane ticket. So I bought a plane ticket, and the plane ticket was a month out. And that month, I continued to drink. I was up to almost a half gallon of whiskey a day.
Dang. You're drinking a lot.
Yeah, I had, you know, during this time period when all this was going on, I had been in another relationship with somebody off and on that was extremely toxic. And I always equated him with safety. He was my safe place, and I spent a lot of time with him. He was very possessive, very controlling, pretty much isolated me from any friends that I had currently had. It was just really toxic, and I hated myself. I hated everything about me, and so I tried to kill myself. I tried to walk through 4 lanes of highway traffic in the pouring down rain in the dark, and I couldn't get any of the cars to hit me. It was like they were all just barely missing me, and I don't understand how that, I couldn't explain it. Anyways, I didn't die. I had gotten in a few screaming matches with my father at that point, because I was just staying wherever I could. I didn't really have a stable home
You
at
didn't
that
go
point.
back and stay with your friends?
No,
Okay.
I left. I had my clothes were in the trunk of my car. I lived in my car, essentially. There was a couple times where
Wow, so just in the last, it sounds like
month.
in like the
It
last,
was-
sounds like in like what, a few months,
a year
a year, you go from
being
having a house with your friends, not ideal, but having a house with your friends and having a job and obtaining a certificate, to living in your car, to drinking excessively, and attempting to kill yourself.
yeah.
I mean, your addiction escalated really, really
Yeah,
fast.
and that was really my bottom. I had been to the ER several times because my kidneys were failing,
Mm-hmm.
because all I was drinking was alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't drinking anything else, so my body was starting to shut down at that point too. So emotionally, physically, mentally, I was done. I made it to Alaska, barely. my clean date at that time was 11/11 of '07, which is interesting because my wife's birthday is 11/11.
12 years ago, almost.
Yeah. I moved in with my aunt, and that's really where my sobriety began. I didn't tell her how bad the problem was that I had, or what was really going on. I just pretty much told her that I wanted to go to a meeting with her every day, because I'd been exposed to AA. I kind of
From
knew.
a young age.
Yeah, I
mean,
knew.
yeah.
I knew what the motions looked like. I just didn't know what it meant.
Sure.
I just knew that I didn't want to ever feel the way that I had felt that last month of my life. Yeah, and so I started going to meetings with her. I didn't talk for the first month I was at meetings. She, helped me get a job again, and I eventually got a job at the hospital as a CNA.
And at this point, what are you thinking? Your first month of
thinking-
sobriety, because you've discussed earlier this idea that you've had to grieve
Yeah,
a lot of lost things.
I'm thinking.
Are you thinking like, oh, dang, dude, like
I'm thinking
I'm
I can
about
go
to
back
lose a
to
lot
it.
of. Oh, okay.
I'm
Okay.
thinking I can go back to it, and that
Manage it.
It was just the people that I was
Sure.
around and the type of environment. But now that I can I can be stable again and have a good job, and because I was never a problem of saving up the money. Functionally, on the outside, I always looked like I was functioning just fine. Always. I was very,
Yeah.
very secretive. Okay,
You're
yeah.
functioning okay.
I was functioning okay. Comparatively to the rest of my family,
Right.
I was
You were doing great.
I was doing
Yeah.
great compared to the
Yeah.
rest of my family.
Yeah.
So,
But if you were to be
Yeah.
honest, and I'm not,
Yeah.
if you were to look back now, and you saw you ran into yourself, you today ran into yourself then, you might have thought like, this person's having a little bit of a hard time functioning these
yeah,
days.
yeah,
Perhaps.
yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
So I didn't talk the first month I was at meetings. I didn't really
And
feel anything.
Are you thinking like I gotta get this under control?
Yep. I just gotta
Enough so
control
I gotta
this.
learn how to master this, but not master my addiction so that I can be sober and live a fulfilling life, but so that I need to master this issue so that I can manage it well and live a fulfilling life.
Yeah, because
fun life, exciting.
My
what you're
entire
thinking.
life, from the time my mom went to AA meetings, I said, I'm never going to be an alcoholic.
Hmm.
I had always said, I'm never going to be an alcoholic. So at that point,
And now you're hi, I'm Heidi, I'm an alcoholic, and you're thinking, dang.
and at that point, I was like, no. I was still comparing the fact that I was 20, that this didn't happen to me, that didn't happen to me. I didn't get a DUI. I've never been in handcuffs.
I was a teenager,
Yeah.
my behavior was not incredibly abnormal compared to some other teenage behavior
Yeah.
or, early teen behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. So I did good for about 9 months. I got a sponsor. I didn't really work the steps though.
Sure.
It was all really mediocre. A lot of it was.
And
I
your
was going
sponsor
for the
was wanting you to
social.
work the steps?
Yeah, I was going for the social aspect. Super promiscuous. Just anything I could do to not feel again. Just there was no drugs in my body at that point. So yeah, that was pretty interesting time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I turned 21, sober,
Grieving.
grieving. Yeah, I bought a bunch of sparkling apple cider because they come in glass,
Yeah, like on,
Bottles.
on a Thanksgiving.
and I
maybe.
would just pop the lid off and chug the apple cider, and I just
Grieved.
I got a tattoo on my 21st birthday, like jailhouse style almost. I mean, like at home kit, like
Nice.
on my
Not
inner ankle.
recommended.
That hurt so bad. Oh
Yeah.
man. But yeah, I did some really just wonky stuff because I was grieving.
Mhm.
Exactly. Because I was like, oh, that rite of passage wasn't there. I made it about 9 months. Moved out of my aunt's. Right before I moved out of my aunt's, I was staying with a friend of mine, and she had this great idea that she knew somewhere to get pot. And at this point, I had decided I was going to move back to Oregon.
Your
I'd bought
aunt's-
the plane
And
ticket.
your aunt says this is bad.
Yeah, she was like, "No, why would you move back?" Oh, my excuse. No, it was just I had fun. It was a great 9 months. Things aren't working out, which is this total lie. I had even bought my plane ticket already, and my best friend, my rock, she'd actually moved up here with me because I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna get her sober too." Like, this is gonna be awesome. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. Anyway, so I decide that I'm gonna get stoned. That's a good idea, because I'm just gonna leave anyways. So I don't need these people. I don't need to go to do any of this. Yeah, sure, let's do it. So I get ripped off the first bag. That should have been my first indicator that things were not gonna work out the way I thought they were gonna work out. I finally get what I'm looking for, and I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of details, but basically right before I do it, I look down and there's somebody in the fellowship calling my phone. And I've got everything in my hand, and I'm looking at my phone, and I'm looking at it, looking at my phone, and I'm looking at it, I'm looking at my phone. And I remember being like, fuck it. Yeah, that was it. Fuck it. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
And so really for me, that, like, the whole thing when we talk about the relapse happens way before we pick up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was so apparent
Yeah.
to me thinking
You had
back on it now.
decided.
I decided a month ago that I
Yeah.
was going to relapse. It was literally just a ticking time bomb for when it was going to happen. So that night, here's 0 to 60 once again. That night I was stoned. I went and got alcohol. My friend had given me a bunch of benzos and whatever else. I just took the whole handful, put
Was
it
your
in my
friend
mouth.
using pretty often?
No, she
This
wasn't.
friend was just kind of like maybe
No,
maybe
she
an
was
addict,
an-
maybe
she's
not.
an
but-
addict.
Okay, but
Through and through.
she was just kind of thinking, oh,
Well, we
we'll smoke
kind of
a little
like
weed,
went
party a little bit.
We kind of went back out together.
Sure.
We were both
Right.
kind of like,
Or-
yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah, we're getting
And
stoned. Yeah, we're partying.
It was bad. It was all
Yeah.
bad. I mean, 0 to 100 once again, but I could tell that it had progressed because I had blacked out that night. I was the first right out the gate.
Yeah.
What do you got? I want it. I mean, I can't even tell you what I took that night. Woke up the next day, slept with another freaking guy. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me right now. Who does this? People don't do this. This is not normal stuff. And I went to a meeting that day. And I said,
That's fast.
I scared myself. Scared myself straight on that one. I went to a meeting, and so my clean date's been the same ever since.
Wow.
7/26
You
of
got-
08.
I don't know, but you turned that around quick.
I was like, nope.
That could have been like a 5-year runner.
It could have been, yeah.
It was a 1-dayer.
It was a one
Wow.
dayer. But I honestly, that was enough.
You were just like, no.
I saw
I
it. Yeah.
cannot.
I didn't get on the plane either.
Nice.
Didn't get on the plane. 3 weeks later, the person that I'm married to now and I hooked up, which we're not going to go into that.
Thanks.
Female relationship. I don't know where I decided that was going to happen, but that happened.
Right. Oh, because you wait, all your relationships before then had been heteronormal?
Yep.
Like that? Heteronormal?
Mm-hmm.
It's a term.
Yep.
Really?
Okay. Wow. So you were like, whoa. You were having a crisis. A crisis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a cute little bit. Okay.
Sorry if you ever listen to this significant other, you were crisis. Once upon a time. Not anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway,
We've adjusted.
we've adjusted. That was a phase. It's not a phase
Well, it
anymore.
wasn't a phase.
Yeah, all right.
Long phase.
You're part of the situation.
I did hear a lot of
Yeah,
that
it
though.
is.
I did it. Oh, it's just a phase. You're just going through a phase.
Well,
I'm
right.
like, so early
Okay.
recovery this time around for me. I worked the steps 1 through 12. I had a couple different sponsors. I just couldn't find somebody that was okay with the fact that I was with a female.
Really? Even in is that a thing?
Not
huh?
at that time.
In AA then? I guess that's 10 years ago.
Yeah. I couldn't find somebody that was a super good fit. Plus, there was still a lot of bull malarkey that I wasn't willing to really own up to.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not surprising, right? I mean,
Yeah.
early on,
Yeah.
a lot of coming too, right? Growth process, right?
Yeah. I moved in.
That's it's kind of off topic, but that does, even 10 years ago, kind of surprised me that you couldn't find an AA person that would be willing,
Not
or
one
at
that
least
I
easily.
liked.
Because, you know,
Not one that I liked that had what I wanted. Because they say when you find a sponsor, you want to find somebody that has certain qualities that, you know, they have what you want. I mean, if you want to get really shallow and they have like the nice car and all that, like, sure, whatever gets you to like start working on yourself, please, by all means, do it. For me, I was looking for a motherly figure because at that point my mom had had 20 years sober and she went back out.
dang,
My mom
Wow.
was gone, out of the picture.
really? After 20 years.
Yeah, and I just backing up just a little bit since, you know, you brought up grief. My great grandmother both of them had passed away the first month of my initial recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. And then, so really the only person I had to turn to in my family dynamic that was sober, that really understood, was my grandfather. So he was a huge, huge part my first couple of years of sobriety. My dad was off and on. He was remarried at that point, and he decided to move to Kodiak. So he wasn't that far away.
Kind of expensive to get to Kodiak, though.
Yeah. So looking for that motherly figure was extremely important, and it was difficult in the beginning, especially with everything that had been going on. It was kind of like a huge snowball of my life that, as I had known it, was completely gone all over again. And so I did what I always do. I jumped into work. I would go to meetings all day, and then I would work all night. I was working 3 jobs at that point. I had managed to save up enough money to get my own apartment. And shortly in between there, I decided it was a good idea to get in a relationship with someone that had 3 years of recovery already under their belt. Not to mention the fact that it was a female.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was new.
That was
Is it,
definitely new.
Is a general kind of, not rule, but isn't it suggested, like in a lot of AA, NA communities, that one simply have a relationship with a plant in a caretaker way for the first year?
In layman's
And
terms.
if they can keep that plant from death,
Yeah,
that they
that's-
may be able to, may be ready for a relationship with a human being.
In an ideal world, sure, if we were like watching 28 Days Later and that's how they do it, like
Sure.
if you can envision like the sad, pathetic little bulldog. But in reality, it's one of the biggest struggles that I've seen in recovery and that I've faced in recovery, because I have an addictive personality.
Mhm.
I'm not just the drugs and all that. That was just like something that I used to fix myself, fix what I thought was broken. And the reality is that I didn't know what a healthy friendship, let alone a healthy relationship, looked like. So I was constantly seeking out some sort of semblance of that, and any way I could fill that God-sized hole, as they say. It's kind of a crude way of looking at it, but in reality, that's essentially what we call 13 stepping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's 12 steps, but really, like, you know, and it's super, even today, it's super taboo and, like, frowned upon if somebody has over a year to date somebody that has less than a year.
Right.
They consider it predatory.
Sure. Huh.
But I believe today, looking at it, I mean, I sought her out just as much as she sought me out, whether I was oblivious to it at that point or not, and whether she was more observant of it. It doesn't really matter. But yes, they say don't do that because you're not focusing on your recovery. You're in fact taking that person and turning that person into your higher power instead of that drug or whatever else you're trying to replace it with. So that made life difficult because now I was in a relationship with someone, and at the same time I was trying to be honest about my behaviors. I moved in with her after just a very short period of time. And we got a dog. So yeah, there was some of that. That didn't work out very well.
Just kind of moving so fast.
Yeah. My grandfather was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And there was kind of this, this area that wasn't talked about in my family. I was the only one that worked in the medical field. And so anytime anyone was sick, it was always call Heidi. And so that was kind of like an unspoken thing between him and I, because we did talk a lot. Like when it got to that point, because he had stage 4, when it got to that point, I was to be in Oregon and like providing hospice care. I had about, I had a really good relationship with him at that point. And it was, things on my mother's end were starting to get really unstable for my little sister. She's 9 years younger than I am. And,
So she was like 11.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Vulnerable age. And your mom's had relapsed and has somewhat been escalating, I'm sure.
yeah. So I volunteered, my wife, well, at that point, my girlfriend and I volunteered to take my sister for the summer.
Okay.
Because I was stable enough to do that. And
Yeah.
I owed her that amend. Because I did some very unsafe things in my youth, like driving under the influence with her in the car.
Sure.
Things that I wasn't proud of. And so, I felt that I could give her that stability that she needed at that point. I had right around a year at that point clean. So I took her that summer, and from that point on until she actually graduated high school, I had her about every 6 months for at least a month to 2 months at a time.
For 7 years.
Uh-huh.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
You guys built kind of a mother-daughter relationship over that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That was
Tanya, yeah,
hard?
my wife, even, my wife was even, very close to my sister too, we both took on that motherly role.
Do you think having that responsibility helped you with recovery, or was it just kind of an extra thing that?
I value the fact that she looked up to me, and that I could be that rock for her that she needed.
Yeah.
Because I'd spent a lot of time in my childhood trying to model that for my little brother, and so that wasn't really anything new to me. And I prided myself a lot on being like that perfect sister, the perfect daughter, the perfect granddaughter. I mean, I'm the oldest grandchild on both sides of my family, the oldest great grandchild on both sides of my family, and the only girl for like 9 years. There was a lot of pressure to be perfect and to do perfect things. So,
Where did that come from, though? Do you think? Just like, because I mean, I don't
I'm not
know,
sure.
but it wasn't like, it was mostly coming from yourself, I would imagine. I mean, your
Yeah.
mom doesn't, from what it sounds like, she wasn't
I felt that there was
super.
an expectation to hit the bar, because neither one of my parents graduated high school, for one. I watched what my dad did, and it was hard work. And,
Right.
I watched my mom struggle with trying to own a business and not necessarily having the skills to do so. And that, coupled with the fact that I was never going to be an alcoholic,
Sure, okay.
so I really
Right.
tried to hit that next bar. And I modeled
So
a
your
lot of
pressures may have been more to, like, avoid failure than they were
Yeah.
to achieve perfection.
that. The whole do better than I did.
Sure,
Oh yeah.
sure.
So I had my sister off and on, and I was going to meetings, but I still wasn't really engaged. I had worked maybe the first 3 steps, the first few years of recovery, and at about the 3-year mark, it was kind of like I didn't know who I was. I was 23-ish, 24, and my relationship was pretty rocky at that point with my significant other, and I had an older lady in the program that, I would talk to on a regular basis, partly due because I had decided that I wanted to get more involved in meetings, so I'd started to make coffee for a particular meeting 2 nights a week. And so there was that requirement, that accountability piece of like, you have to be at this meeting because people are counting on you, and heaven forbid I let somebody down. So I actually got to use that to my advantage. And
A
that's
big part of recovery is service, right? I mean, that's like one of the
huge.
key elements, right?
It's huge. You have to have that piece. At least I have to. Because sometimes that
What do you think that does?
it teaches you
I mean,
how
it sounds good, right?
how
But
to-
what is it? What do you think it does? What do you think it
teaches
actually?
you integrity.
Okay.
It teaches you about how to function in society. These are actually the rules of society. It's not the other way around. You don't get to dictate what the rules of society are.
So it's more like you have to learn to serve on other people's terms,
Yeah.
on society's terms.
Mhm.
So that's a big part of it.
Well, and the 12 step, the way that it's laid out is it's not meant to be a government. It's not governmental, but there's basic principles and foundations that there's that expectation there.
Mhm.
And it's an easy place where they're very loving and forgiving if you mess up.
Sure.
And you're going to mess up. They expect you to, because they know that aspect of who you are, that addictive aspect. And they have that piece of experience that you can't get in the outside world. And so that's really a great place to practice being a productive member of society. And so really that's kind of the huge piece that kept me initially those first few years of recovery, because I hadn't worked the steps completely, and I hadn't really built a relationship with a sponsor, even though I had put on that facade that
'Cause
I was.
I know there's probably not like a prescription necessarily, or like a one box fits all kind of for each person that is doing the steps, but generally you're moving a little bit faster than a step a year, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm not
there's-
trying to put you down.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
trying
no,
to
no,
say
no.
that
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like you were maybe dragging your feet to some extent.
Well, they say, some people say we grow at the rate of pain. So our level of willingness is measured by the amount of pain we're in. And so, I mean, one of the big sayings
Yeah,
is
wow, that's
when
cool.
the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change, then you'll change. And life wasn't painful enough.
Sure.
I was coasting.
Mm-hmm.
So when it became painful enough, things shifted. I had made yet again another decision that I needed to go a step further and actually take it more seriously than I had before. So another layer of my recovery had been unraveled, per se.
Do you think there could have been another way beside, it's like having your back against the wall, right?
So I tried that. I was like, I'm going to prove you guys wrong. You don't have to just grow with the rate of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a step, and as I worked that step, I realized that I was actually in a lot of pain. And I was like,
right.
even
Yeah.
though, my life, I don't feel that my life is unmanageable when I actually start to apply the principles of the step or principles of the steps, I do realize that there's still more things that don't quite sit right with my life. And
So it wasn't
Yeah.
just like coasting, it was also kind of ignoring what reality was, and then when you work through the step, you're like, oh wait, this actually does kind of suck. Like,
well, and on some level, we all ignore reality.
oh, definitely. No, I'm not saying that I don't. 'Cause
Yeah.
I totally
Right,
understand that.
sure.
But
Yeah. The difference is that I see is as I don't want to grow up. I never figured out how to grow up. And so I'm constantly at every phase essentially stomping my fists on the high chair going, this isn't fair. How come I have to do this and no one else does? It's like, well, they kind of have a blueprint already for life, and you are a really slow learner at this. So, yeah, so 3 years into that, that's kind of where I was at that point. I was still working at the hospital as a CNA. I had started college. I was going to college full time to go to school for nursing, and I had applied for the nursing program, and I had applied for that darn program like 4 times, 4 years in a row.
It's competitive. It's hard.
I could not get in, and so and I spent so much time basing my self-worth on advancement in jobs, and so that was a huge hurdle I had to look at, that maybe this just wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And I got married at that point.
So your relationship that was rocky maybe wasn't as rocky, or were you thinking, if I get married, this will smooth things out?
No, it was.
So I don't think it's uncommon.
It's not uncommon, but I mean, we didn't have kids or anything. So I think that was a piece of it. I think that getting married and like actually solidifying that I wasn't going anywhere, because I was the one that was super flighty,
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
was really kind of how some of that spurred, but also the fact that like I married my best friend, quite literally. And I just kind of learned a little bit about this in class the other day. So, yeah, so I married my best friend, and it was really cool because it was like the first time people had actually showed up for me.
Oh, at your wedding?
Yeah, like my dad showed up, my sister was there, everybody that I wanted to be there that could be there was there. So that was really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I've never been married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been married twice to the same person. It's pretty cool.
You had 2 weddings?
Yeah. We'll we'll get there.
Okay.
But basically, right during that time point, that time, I also purchased my first home. So I was 24. I purchased my first home in my name only.
Wow.
Just because of like some legality issues with credit anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to purchase the
Yeah,
home, so I
get that.
purchased it, and it was like I had this vision of just having this happy home full of children, white picket fence, dream job.
Mm-hmm.
I had this illusion that
Health insurance.
I mean, all those things, like the American dream.
Yeah.
I mean, the house that I purchased, it was 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,500 square feet.
Wow. Ballin'.
Plenty of room for kids. Like, I always wanted to be a mom.
Yeah.
And, I was still rocking and rolling with recovery, going to meetings 3 days a week. I had, at this point, have progressed through working all 12 steps, and I had started to sponsor women in the program.
So as you're taking on more responsibility, sponsoring people, and really it seems like getting into the steps, what were some of the rewards, and what were some of like the, I guess for lack of a better word, costs, What were the costs of that? Hard, right?
Yeah, so because we had such a big house and there was only 1.5 rooms that were occupied, eventually my sister got her own room, like it was her room, because she was there so much, it was just second home. It's more like her first home though, really. We would open up our home to people in early recovery and let them come live with us. And I think in the 5 years that we did that, we probably had like 20 or 30 recovering addicts come through and stay with us.
That had to have been hard.
Very hard.
Because you got to maintain some pretty strict boundaries at times, right?
Talk about a learning
And
curve.
they're getting pushed often, right?
Yeah. Some of the mistakes I made was sponsoring women that lived with me.
Sure.
What were some other mistakes? Not setting clear enough boundaries with clear enough consequences. That's all learning stuff, and that really was super beneficial to my recovery. Not being so worried about what people thought about me. what my outsides looked like, because these people were living with me, so they really got the nitty gritty. This is who Heidi is, you know. Yeah, so that was some of the pluses and the costs to it. Also sponsoring women, like in the beginning I thought I was really gonna mess them up. Oh gosh, can I really do this? I'm gonna screw them up. And I remember my sponsor sitting down with me and being like, look, Heidi, they're already messed up. It's pretty hard to mess somebody up more than they're already messed up. And you're just working the 12 steps with them. You're not their banker. You're not their taxi. You're not there to just listen to them whine and moan about their problems. You're there to work 12 steps. That's it. If a friendship grows, that's great. If it doesn't, that happens too. Like, it's okay. There doesn't have to be a bunch of pressure on you to fix them or their problems, which was really different for me.
Do you think it was easier in recovery having those people there where you're working with them 12 steps? They really depend on you. Did that really keep you honest, or were you already kind of in your recovery kind of past that where it's like...
So what that did for me, it catapulted me into continuing to work with my sponsor. Because I can't give something away that I don't have.
Yeah.
I can't teach someone something if it hasn't been taught to me.
Right.
And the
And you
other part
probably-
of that,
I would imagine you got to start to empathize with a sponsor who has reluctant sponsees. Right? You're sponsoring someone and they're kind of reluctant and you're getting frustrated.
Yeah,
You're like,
and so then I'm
damn,
calling my
this is how
sponsor.
my sponsor feels when I'm
Yeah.
dragging my feet,
I'm calling
right?
my sponsor. And I'm like, what the heck do I do with this person? And she's like, listen, it's not your program. It's their program.
Sure.
What was it like for you? Did you do everything?
Right.
Did you do X, Y, and Z perfectly? And like, well, no. But, you know, my expectations of others it's a little bit much sometimes. So those are some of the things that really helped me. But I still wasn't super engaged. I mean, I was going to meetings, but it still wasn't really enough. So a friend of mine had gone on a road trip, because I went on road trips with women in the program. We would go to Anchorage and go to visit other fellowships and things like that. It's kind of weird. I kind of feel like sometimes it sounds like churchy stuff.
Sounds culty.
It's not a cult. I'm not even gonna get into that.
A little like, I'm just kidding.
I
No, I'm totally
know.
kidding. I actually, I took a social psych class and looked up, was gonna write a paper on like cults and everything, and really, like, there's a lot of like culty elements to a lot of things in life, you know, like just like my prof said that he views like cults like on a group level, kind of like how he views like mental illness on like an individual level. Like most people show some characteristics of some kind of like mental disorder on to some degree throughout their life, you know, like maybe they're a little bit depressed at times, maybe they're a little bit whatever, you know. Whereas some groups at times, you know, have some kind of like somewhere on the spectrum of like, okay, I'm getting some like pretty strong group vibes here, really even. But like the word cult has just been like branded so much more outside of like what it maybe really like is meant to, you know, portray. I don't know. But I get what you're saying. You're like, oh, we're gonna go see this chapter and this chapter. I mean, you guys, you are like, you have a strong, like it's a strong group. You have similar beliefs and habits, some certain customs, almost some like rituals at times. I mean, in as much as like
Sayings.
you have, So sure, I mean, there's some strong group vibes, but I mean, you don't have some like charismatic leader that wants you to donate all your money and move to the hills and like
And
drink some
Jonestown.
Kool-Aid, right?
And that's why the service aspect is so important.
Right.
Because you have to not only work the 12 steps, but you have to work what we call the 12 traditions. Then there's also the 12 concepts. I don't know if anyone has mentioned the 12 concepts.
I don't think so.
Anyways, so a friend of mine had said to me that she noticed that I gave off a lot of anxiety around groups of women, just groups of people. And it was true. Like, I still super socially awkward. You know, being that really shy kid, and you take the drugs away, and I don't have that buffer anymore.
Yeah.
And I still haven't figured out how to interact with
Right,
people. Like,
right.
I'm not one of those, I don't want to talk about the weather. I could care less about the weather. So what do you talk about? And I could only talk about recovery with one person for so long before I'm bored and I don't want to talk to you anymore. Maybe it sounds totally jerkish, but that's me.
You should join CrossFit. Then you can get CrossFit friends and just talk about CrossFit the entire time.
I think it means
That's a cult too, bro.
Anyways, so she had mentioned to me that maybe I should take on a subcommittee position,
Okay.
doing activities, hosting and putting together events for the community down here. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got some skills to do that. I mean, I'm in college, and I'm going for this Associates of Arts degree. I mean, I can do some leadership stuff.
I have
for sure.
skills, yeah,
I
yeah.
got skills.
I got skills.
And so that was really I put both feet into doing some service work. And I started putting together big events, actually really big events. There's one huge event that one of the 12 Steps committee or communities does down here, and there's people from all over the state that come. And there's anywhere from 150 to 200 people for a 3-day event. And I'm coordinating that with other recovering addicts. And I tell you what, it is hard. It is like herding cats to get people to work together on certain things. And so that's really where I got that buffer I needed. And my recovery just sprang from that point. I mean, I was super involved in everything. I always had a weekend booked with either a committee or doing step work with somebody or going to an event with my significant other. And I was dragging my little sister to all this stuff. And, she'd already been kind of exposed to it, but it was cool to just see that piece for her too, because she learned so many skills that she hadn't learned at that point. And at that point, she was about 16. And my mom sent her up to live with me full time at that point. So here I am.
Because your mom was continuing to
My mom was.
kind of on and off the.
It's a little
Okay.
bit longer of a backstory,
Sure.
but she was living with me, and
Your sister was.
yeah, my
Right,
sister
right,
was.
right, right.
She was 16, junior in high school. Wrong boy, blah, blah, blah. Mom decided, you're out of control. You need to go live with your sister. It's kind of like deja vu. She sent me away at 15. You're out of control. You got to go live with your grandma. I'm like, wow, where have I seen this before? So my sister came to live with me, and she's seen me go to school full time. She's seen me do all these activities, being super involved in the recovery community, super involved in my marriage. And she's like, I'm going to get a job. And I was like, awesome, get a job. And so she's doing super good. She's working nights at McDonald's. I'm like super proud of her. I'm like, way to go. And she's like, I'm tired. I don't want to go to school. And I had this philosophy, and I was like, check it out. If you want to act like the big girls and play like the big girls, then you have to do all of it. You can't just not go to school and go to work. Like, this isn't going to fly. And we had this really good relationship going. So a few months later, she's doing great. I'm doing great. We're both working nights. I'm working nights at the hospital. She's working nights at McDonald's. We had both gotten off work, and we were going to go fishing because we do a lot of fishing in the summer. I do a lot of outdoor stuff. Like, I love hiking. I love fishing. I learned hobbies, activities to do that aren't centered around using.
You gotta fill
And
your time with something, I suppose. Huh?
well, I mean, I could sit on the couch, but I choose not to. And I was like, well, I'm going to go to this women's meeting. Do you want to come with? and then we'll just go fishing afterwards. We'll just throw everything in the trunk and we'll go. And she's like, no, I'll get my friend to pick me up, and I'll meet you at the club, and then we'll just go. And I was like, cool. Well, long story short, she was with some kid driving on the escape route to meet me, and she was in a car accident. And it was super traumatic for her and for me because I came up on the scene. They life flighted her to Anchorage. She shattered 4 of her vertebrae in her back. And we're talking about a girl who's a state championship dancer. Like, she lived to dance. I mean, her calf muscles and her thigh muscles, oh, holy buckets. That girl had some serious leg power. You know, we would go running together. Lots of cool stuff. She is a functioning quadriplegic now. So at 17 years old, she became paralyzed from the waist down. That was really hard. So she went to Oregon for a few months to do rehabilitation, and some people in the fellowship helped me remodel my house so that it was handicap accessible. And after about 4 months, she came back to live with me. And at the time, I was still going to school full-time, still working full-time, and now I'm caring for my little sister full-time. My wife and I had to get up every 2 hours to rotate her so that she wouldn't get bed sores. A lot of things that you never imagined you'd have to do, I had to do. And looking back on it today, I'm really grateful for my recovery because I was able to do those things. And I feel that I got a lot of strength from watching her go through that, and she got a lot of strength watching me care for her. And she graduated high school. It was intense. There was a lot of physical therapy, a lot of things that were really horrible. So I was going to work caring for people. I was at home caring for people. I was going to school full time. I had no time for myself, and I was drowning. I kept saying to my wife, I need a break. And she would just push it off. And she was like, oh, you're fine. And I'm like, no, I need a timeout. I need a break. And it was like no one was hearing me. And I felt trapped. And I got really suicidal. And I ended up at Providence.
Yeah.
I was Title 47 to Providence at 7 years clean.
Yeah.
Finally hit that, you know, the 12-step program is awesome, but once again, that's just a symptom of my problem. I do have other issues that I need to deal with. And that's where I started seeking outside help. There's a couple of different resources I tried. The White Raven Center in Anchorage, if you've never heard of it, it's amazing for PTSD. It's alternative. It has helped me, though. Yeah, lots of stuff with that. And the recovery community just embraced me and loved me, and they really taught me that it's okay to be human. And they even, you know, teach that there's things that we need outside help for. During that time, right before my sister's accident, my grandfather had passed away, and I was his hospice nurse. So I went through grief with that also. So it was just like bam, 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 bam. All this compounded grief. All the compounded grief from being a CNA. I've seen hundreds of people pass away. You don't just push that away. You don't just brush that off. All these things have changed me. And so now I grow from them instead of running from them. I was really afraid to touch on all that pain because I thought that it would kill me. Until I had no other choice. It was literally, I kill myself or I get high, and I absolutely refused to get high. I was like, I will not get high. I would rather just go down on my own accord than allow drugs or alcohol to take me down. And so I walked through that pain. And, yeah. A year and a half ago, I was, okay, just a little bit back up. During this whole time period, I'm wanting that white picket fence and the kids to fill the home, and find out I can't have kids. And my wife doesn't want to have kids because, well, she's 10 years older than I am. And I'm like, I want freaking kids, man. Like, I want kids. I want to go through the whole thing, like being pregnant, all that stuff. Like, I'm stable enough. So fertility treatment after fertility treatment, like, it was pretty horrific. My hair was falling out. Like, it was bad. That never happened. I tried fertility treatments for 3 years. So all these things came to a head, and all of a sudden I get this phone call from my wife, and she's like, my second cousin, my aunt's dying, and she's caring for my second cousin, and my second cousin is 6. And if we don't take her, she's going to go into foster care. And I was like, oh, hell no. We're taking her. She's ours. And within a week, she was on my doorstep. The cutest little kid I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, oh, I'm your mom. That's it. And so it's been kind of an adjustment for her. And we've got to both work through our own grief because, her primary mother figure passed away from cancer. And right after I got her, about 6 months later, my father died of a massive heart attack at the age of 51. And that was just a little over a year ago. At that point, he had been living in Nikiski, and my house was in Nikiski, so we really weren't that far apart. And that last year before he died, we spent a lot of time together, and I really got to build a relationship with him. And he was just starting to get to know my daughter, just starting to get to know her. Actually, the day that he passed, he took her on her first grandpa-granddaughter date. They went and saw A Wrinkle in Time. They went to the movies.
Wow.
And my dad had dropped my daughter off with me at the women's meeting. And I got a call 40 minutes later that the ambulance was at my dad's house and that he was being transported to the hospital. I went back to the room when they were conducting CPR on him. And of course, once again, I took it upon myself to be tasked with the hard questions. How long has he been down? Have you had any sinus rhythm? Like, all those questions that, my family doesn't know. They're freaking clueless. No. I said, you need to stop CPR. You need to be done, because it had been 20 minutes. I'm like, no, this is not what he wants. He wanted to go on his own terms, and you need to stop. And, yeah. That happened a year ago, last Monday.
Wow.
Grief has been my biggest teacher, and no one gets out alive. Recovery has shown me how to be gentle with myself, how to be gentle with others, and really how to just cherish the life that I have, and not take it for granted, and take care of myself and the people around me to the best of my ability. The position I currently work now, I've had for the last 3 years, and I kind of just fell into my lap. Wasn't really expecting it, but I chose it because I wanted to help people. So, kind of where we're at today, really. Yeah.
If you could go back and talk to yourself, maybe at the beginning of your recovery or at a key point, what do you think you would say? Like, what kind of advice would you give yourself of, like, hey, this will really help if you
you know.
Don't worry about what other people think.
Hmm.
Be gentle with yourself. Those are probably the two biggest things.
Yeah.
Don't be so serious and play more.
Yeah.
My kid has definitely taught me how to play. Like, we get down in the mud puddles. Like, I will put on some rubber boots. I got extra tufts in my truck right now. And we will go play in a mud puddle. And, yeah.
Is it just, I know you'd mentioned that kind of this process of growing up, like you said, you kind of been fighting it. Like, you don't want to grow up. Like you said, you were pounding on the high chair. No, I don't want to grow up. But is it the kind of play that you're experiencing now? Is it more wholesome in a way? Is it a different kind of play, like not trying to avoid responsibility sort of play?
Exactly. Yeah, it's the childlike play, the having fun to have fun, not having
Gotcha.
fun to numb something out or to hide from something.
Yeah.
Having fun and not worrying about who's gonna see it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and just kind of teaching my kid those things and realizing, trying to break that cycle of addiction, because she's got it in her genes too. And that's probably my biggest fear today. It's like, oh man, if I can give you any coping tools right now, like, I'm just gonna lay it on thick and we're gonna have fun in the process. I mean, she got in trouble the other day. She made it a not so good decision, and so we had a little talk about consequences and thinking before we act. Like, those are things that I'm sure my mom maybe said to me and my dad maybe said to me. I was just trying a different approach today, and actually using the things that I've learned in recovery to do that.
Tell her to play the tape forward.
Yeah, but in 7-year-old terms,
Yeah, fair enough.
not adult terms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 7-year-olds are like, what do you mean play the tape forward?
What's a tape?
Yeah,
Never
exactly.
mind.
What's the tape? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it's cool. Sometimes I feel that I've still missed out on a lot of things, but today I don't know. I'm willing to take out the fine china and use it. And that's really all I can hope for.
Did you, what were your, because I think some people, when they are in the early processes of getting clean, have, strong urges to use quite consistently, even. And then, I've heard like some people say, oh, those go away or those lessen. What have your experiences been with those types of urges?
I still get urges.
Yeah.
I have to check in with myself. Like, hey, why do I want to use right now? We use like I'm trying not to use like psychobabble terms because I'm just not, but what's not right with you right now? What's really going on? Sometimes it's because I am not getting my way, or there's some sort of thing that I'm neglecting. Really simple, we use hangry. Yeah. Hangry is a word.
It is.
Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Right now, sitting here, I'm hungry and I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, and I'm going to be going to work after this. So I have to be gentle on myself and just be aware and use, I guess the coping tools I have today, like my toolbox, like I should just have a whole tool shed at this point. I really hope I have a whole tool shed at this point of things that I can use to distract myself until that obsession has lifted. And then in the beginning, I might have only had like 1 or 2 tools that I could have used, 1 or 2 phone numbers, but really that's where everybody starts. I believe that the more supports you have around you and the more application and the ways of applying those supports have been super key to my recovery.
Yeah. So it sounds like those first 5 years or so, you were really maybe taking on more than you were, kind of ready to take on. Would you? I mean, I know each person's recovery is going to be a little bit differently, but would you maybe recommend to some people to just realize that they're still human?
Yeah.
Sounds like maybe that's.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fine line there though too, because I could use "I'm human" as an excuse also.
Sure.
It's hard because this isn't a cookie cutter process.
Right.
I didn't come into recovery having kids or some of the other factors, just like other people out there don't have the same situation as me. So it's kind of hard to necessarily pinpoint what someone should do. I do know what was taught to me was don't quit quitting. Go to a meeting every chance you get for 90 days. 90 meetings in 90 days, because the reason they say that is because it takes 90 days to form a habit. Like, there's actually some serious thought behind that. It's not just fluff and puff for telling you this. Like, it takes 90 days to form a habit. Plus, you get in the routine of knowing where every meeting is at every point in time. It becomes another tool. If something horrible has just happened, I can look at my watch and go, oh, there's a meeting down the street in 10 minutes. I better get my butt there because I'm literally shaky right now. So there's that. There's get connected, find somebody that has something that you want, and be as honest as you can. Be open to learning new things and be willing to actually take action and do them. Because I can sit here all day and say that I want recovery, but I actually have to do recovery. Wanting and doing are two very different things.
Sure.
And I mean, through my story, I've shared that the doing part has definitely grown and changed. Because in the beginning, if I was to do now what I did in the beginning, I don't believe that the do part was enough. So, yeah.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much for kind of sharing your story with us. Congrats on having 10 years now and getting it together pretty early, 20 years old. That's impressive, really. I'm sure you're not the only one, but it doesn't seem to be the norm that somebody really gets it all together at that age. I know that it can't be, it was not easy.
I definitely don't have it all together.
Right.
But
Sure.
and I just want to point out that life is lifey, and that's like I said in the beginning, that my addiction doesn't define who I am today. I have way more facets to who I am because I do interact with more than just the recovery community today. So I also do some nonprofit stuff. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, so I guess before we wrap up, it sounds kind of like when did addiction somewhat stop defining your life? Because it sounds like in the first, even maybe few years, it kind of did, and it probably needed to, for you to really address what was going on. Because maybe it didn't define your life, but it was consuming your life. I mean, right? Your addiction was consuming it.
And honestly, in all fairness, my recovery had to consume my life for the first few years too. I started to notice it at about 3 years of your recovery, but I didn't actually step out into the world of there might actually be something more to me than just addiction at about age 7.
Trying to avoid, trying to handle your disease, right?
Yeah, about age 7 of my recovery when life got really bad.
Yeah.
In recovery.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Makes sense.
I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
There's more.
Because I think maybe this is somewhat of as we've heard it before, you know, people are like, oh, if I like, and yeah, the number one thing is when you're entering your recovery, you know, is like, I need to not do drugs or alcohol. I need to not do drugs or alcohol. However, that can't be the one and only thing one does, because as we've heard before, it was something like this. It's like, what do you do? What do you got when you sober up a horse thief? You just have a sober horse thief. You know, you got to learn to stop being a horse thief.
Well,
Like, you got to learn to live, right?
right, and then that's actually a big part that I believe some people miss is the 12 steps. Step 6 and 7 are all about that.
Learning to
Are
live,
all
right?
about learning about your character defects.
It's like, so
and
now
your
what, right?
shortcomings.
Yeah, yeah.
What's actually freaking what's some things that you need to work on?
Sure.
You know, and some people work on those and some people don't, and it's not necessarily that they work on them, but they allow their higher power to work on them, and that's kind of getting into that step. But
Sure.
yeah, that's where like this program separates, like they say, the boys from the men and the girls from the women. Like, you're either gonna grow or you're gonna go.
Sure.
You know, and I can only speak for me personally. I feel that simply abstinence is not enough for me today. Some people, it is enough. For me, not so much. And so, you know, that's kind of where that line, because there really are people that's it. They just want to abstain from use. But there's that other piece is if you live dirty long enough, if you're clean and you live dirty, eventually you're not going to be clean anymore.
Sure.
So living dirty doesn't really work when you're trying to be clean.
Right.
A lot
Yeah.
of these little like sayings have
It's metaphors.
the backstories are different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because it sounds like you were plugged into your recovery, and I'd say more than abstinence at the 7-year point.
yeah,
However, I am kind of struck by this, you end up, you know, at somewhat rock bottom in recovery.
Yeah.
And you're like, dang, this isn't working either. You know, like, I'm still at rock bottom. It's just a little different. And it's better, right? I mean, it's a better one, but it's still freaking
no,
rough.
I felt the same way
Okay.
when I hit that bottom at
Yeah.
7 years clean as I did the day I stopped using.
Yeah.
I had that same feeling
Wow.
in the pit of my stomach.
Yeah, yeah.
And I attribute a lot of it to life, and I attribute a lot of it to the fact that there were areas that I hadn't looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because I was afraid
Mm-hmm.
to look at them.
Yeah, I guess to continue with some kind of metaphor that may not really hold up necessarily, but you hit rock bottom before as a drunken horse thief. But if this horse thief kind of thing is the one that's leading you to rock bottom, you're still there, you know, you're just sober.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting that, like, eventually, so yeah, recovery does somewhat consume one's life for a while, but eventually it begins to look a little bit differently. You know, you gotta learn to live in other ways as well.
Well, and that's that big part of how this disease is insidious. It manifests itself they say just as you're learning about recovery, your disease is learning about how to discount it or take advantage of what you're learning. And that's a scary reality. I mean, my mom going out after 20 years, like, I'm like, what in the, you know, I see it now.
Yeah.
I totally see it. We do this thing called Clean Time Countdown, where during events and stuff, we count down from the person in the room that has the most clean time to the person that has the least amount of clean time. And the person that has the least amount of clean time, like, we huddle up around them and, like, really encourage them or whatever. It's evident and it's said that between 5 and 10 years, people go back out. And I can attest to that. Because at 7 years, so between years 1 and years 4, there's like a ton of people. But you get to that 5-year mark, there might be one person.
Really? Yeah.
6-year
Yeah.
mark, there might not be anybody. 7-year mark, one person. 8-year mark, maybe one. Up to 10, there might only be 4 people.
Mhm.
And so on and so forth. Like,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily that people have relapsed. I mean, quite a bit of it is people have relapsed, but the other part of that is some people stop that portion of
Mhm.
the recovery process,
Mhm.
which is unfortunate because we need that experience to help newer people too, and that's a huge part of why I stay plugged in.
Yeah.
You know, it's not all about me today.
Right.
But I do have those other areas of my life that balance that part out.
That's interesting. It is. It is. It's like that abstaining doesn't necessarily do it for you, but also like being consumed, because you were like pretty well consumed by your recovery, and it still was like, so there's like a balance between, you know, letting it somewhat, you know, really be a role in your life, but also, as you've said, you know, it's multidimensional at this point. You know, there are more dimensions to you than just your, you know, addiction. So, I mean, and in other ways, you know, maybe it just works a little bit differently for other people. But however, as you've pointed out, you know, the disease is right when you think you maybe fully have it licked is when it's when it's a problem. So, yeah, interesting questions to think about. So thank you so much for sharing, you know, what's really been a long road of recovery, you know, at this point, 10
Thanks,
years.
guys.
So thank you so much. This is Heidi's story here with Eric and Aaron and Coburn, you and I for the Kenai.